It's almost like this figure came directly from the 80s. Here's a look at the NECA Toys Dungeons & Dragons, the 50th Anniversary Warduke Evil Fighter. Warduke fights as remorseless, cold-hearted mercenary who works for coin. The evil swordsman serves Calic as cohort and adventuring companion from time to time. He wields a flame-tongued long sword and wears a dread helm. He never removes his helmet to reveal his face to others, but the visage beneath it is that of a grim, hideously scarred gladiator. Sure, yeah, his allegiance may have been with LJN before, but NECA gave him the better offer. Just before, of course, we get a closer look at the Dungeons & Dragons 50th Anniversary Retro-Inspired Warduke, I'd like, if I can, to thank the folks over at NECA that provided the sample we could have a look at. Warduke and the earlier looked at Strongheart are available right now in either stores or online, depending on where, of course, you pick your poison and where you'd like to purchase your figures. The figure, though, is going to stand the same as the original Ultimate version of Warduke, simply because they're using the exact same body. The figure, though, is going to stand with the wings, of course, on the sides of his helmet at about 7 3/4 inches in height. If you don't want to include that, which I think is kind of rather silly because he can't remove his helmet, then the figure is only going to be about 7 1/4 inches in height. But if you translate the full height of the figure, then in centimeters, it's about 20 centimeters tall. Unlike the earlier looked at 50th Anniversary Strongheart, which I didn't have in that case, the Ultimate version of him, I can most definitely, though, bring in the Ultimate version of Warduke. The figure, as you can see, is going to be using, again, the same mold, but paint is so much more gloriously applied to the Ultimate release. If, though, you are a big fan of the original 83 line that LJN produced the Dungeons & Dragons figures for, I mean, obviously the newer retro-inspired ones are more a throwback to that original figure line. Haven't yet looked at him either, though, in the 50th Anniversary release, but here's also as well what the figure looks like with the Ultimate version of Elkhorn. Again, it's going to be the case that with the 50th Anniversary figures, you're not going to be getting as high of an accessory count as you would with the Ultimates. You do still get 3 different blades, you still get the fire attachment that goes onto the longsword, and you get a super shiny shield. You would have all those same things with Warduke before, but then the Ultimate figure would also have had 3 interchangeable hands on top of that. Backing up, though, a bit, let's look at this super shiny shield that comes included with this version of Warduke. This is about the only thing that I actually like a little bit more than the original release of Warduke. Bringing that shield right now. The shape and the skull are exactly the same, although you can very obviously see the chrome has now been finished here on the front of the shield, where it would have been more of a dark gunmetal gray with the original approach. I couldn't help but notice, though, putting the two side by side without actually having a scale in front of me, that the one we get here for the 50th anniversary does feel a little heavier than the original Warduke shield. Flipping around, though, to the back, you have still, again, that chrome finish on the back side of this, but now the leather strap that would have been more of a lighter brown on the original release gets more approached in a darker leather on the strap on the back. Attaches, of course, the exact same way on his arms. Now, obviously, I would love to have used this with the other version of Warduke. The thing about it, though, is it does match more closer to the gauntlet arm that he has on the sides. If you were to, say, for example, swap things around, then the shield would look a little out of place. And again, vice versa as well. The figure also as well comes included with 3 different weapons. We'll start first with the smaller blades. He comes included with this version of sword. Now I'm going to again bring in all the ones we got from before with other Warduke. A slightly more darker washed blade here on the original release. A lighter blade, of course, very little in the way of paint additionally added to outside the silver, of course. We also get as well the guard and the hilt are notably darker. With this one actually from the newer version 50th anniversary being a more lighter blue with some additional silver accents added on the end of the hilt. The Ultimate version obviously would have traded then the silver for an all metallic blue finished hilt. Again, it's just a matter of preference. If you are looking to display the figure, you're probably going to stick with all the accessories that come included with that designated Warduke. The figure also as well comes included with a sword that he can sheath on the side of his body. I just happen again to bring in the original one here. Very, again, darker colors approached here with the Ultimate version than there was with the lighter. I mean, obviously here as well when you're looking at the hilt. Instead of one thing, though, approaching this with golds and kind of more, again, that darker metallic blue, you get much this time around a much brighter yellow and brighter blue, again, to match the colors of the original 83 line. This is one of those weapons, though, that unlike the other one, well, I shouldn't say that either. The other one also could have the means to sheath on the side of his body. It's just, again, making sure you're matching up to the appropriate sheaths or holsters on the sides of his body. Let's just move his arms out of the way, for example. Before we actually look at his longsword, he has 2 places to store the shorter blades. So really conveniently, Warduke has the means to store everything. Say, for example, though, And with this case too, as well, you're going to be matching the colors. So see, again, like this one's going to have about the same length of sheath. That's just going to slide really nicely there on the side. Even though this is more kind of based on the original vintage toy, it's nice to see that they still kept the retained chain, something that the original Warduke also had as well. If we flip around the figure on the other side, then there again is storage space. I want to make sure I grab the right sword here. There's a storage space here then to sheath this version of sword. The thing about it though is this one's a little harder I find to get to. And you want to make sure also as well that when you're putting it in his arm, you always put it the right way. I don't know how many times, and I'm still continuing to do this, I always end up putting it the wrong way. This one you also have to fight a lot more, I noticed, to get actually sheathed in there. I don't know why, what it is. It's just something that seems to be holding up the blade from being all the way fed in there. Once you get it in there, it is, again, a struggle. I don't know why. Maybe it's just some additional paint that they added to this, but this is a harder blade, I noticed, to actually get holstered on the side of his body. For the sake of that, and obviously when we look at the figure's articulation, let's just go ahead and remove the sword for right now, because I just don't want to get that in the way. Unfortunately, though, one other thing, too, is because the quarters are so close, you can see that it starts to now rub off the paint on the blade. I've only done this now a couple of times, but you can already see as well, the results of that are already starting to happen. Oh boy, look at that little wear away paint. I don't know, again, like if this particular holster, I didn't have as many of the issues, though, when it came to the other Warduke. Something, though, about this figure, I don't know if there's maybe a built-up of paint inside the sheath here that's causing the resulting wear away on the paint here on the blade. Again, I've only done this a couple of times, but a couple of times was only the number of times I need to do that. Anyways, though, let's look at the other accessory, though, that comes included with the figure. He also gets his long sword. Again, bringing back in the original long sword here. What would have been obviously yellow here on the newer release was originally gold. The gold is now nicely done here with, of course, the stone there in the middle is more darker red. Everything, though, about the newer figure is much more approached in lighter color schemes, more primary colors. The hilt and the guard, as you can see there, is a much brighter approach, both the yellow, the brown, and some additional yellow on the end. I mean, if you're looking more for the realism, the Ultimates version of Warduke, I think, covers it a little bit better. But if you like, again, the way that the LGN toy originally was, maybe if you even had the original toy as a kid, these would be nice little, again, upgrades with some additional sculpting and some additional articulation there as well. So there's a couple of things that you can actually do with the long blade here, the long sword. First of all, you get yourself a fire attachment. The attachment slides on the exact same way as the original one. You basically have to, when you're feeding this through, you want to make sure everything's kind of lined up right. And when you're feeding it, there's a little section right here that you want to make sure you kind of guide the blade through there, just to make sure that it gets on there all the way. Now, one thing they actually have done differently, though, is the actual fire. And if you look at the differences between the fire, the one that we did get here from the Ultimate, as you can see, approached it more with a pastel yellow with outer trims here in orange. This one actually just goes with one singular color, and the color more is kind of a yellowish green. Again, it works the exact same way. So if we got the guard, the actual sword here, and just feed the fire onto it, which again is a really hard thing to do. I mean, again, looking at the differences between the two, I probably could have fed that on just a little bit longer. You can see the way that the fire attaches onto the sword. Technically, it can go all the way up, but again, it's very close quarters just to even try to feed that onto the blade. The other thing that you can obviously do as well when it comes to longsword, obviously, is the fact that the figure does have gripping hands on both sides of his body. One thing he doesn't actually have that we'll talk more about in a moment is 3 additional hands. Not that he necessarily needs it. So, I mean, with the hands that they are right now, the plastic is pretty good in that you don't have to actually heat them up. This is actually, in fact, I noticed this also when we looked at Strongheart. Strongheart, the plastic for his hands was pretty soft. I didn't have to worry about heating it up at all for him to properly hold any one of his weapons. So, of course, you can have the longsword or any one of the weapons in Warduke's hands default without having to change anything out, which you can also do as well. Take the longsword out of his hand. There we go. Flip the figure around on the back. And again, storage for everything that the figure comes included with. He's got also as well a scabbard or a sheath on the back of his body that you can then sheath the sword. The sword actually sheaths better than it does on this one here. Again, I don't know why this one, I fight so much to try to get the blade in there. The sword actually fits really nicely on the back of his body without having to fight at all to do that. So, like, I like the idea that Warduke does have available means to store everything that the figure comes included with. And, of course, the other thing as well is that you can also get as well the shield on his hands. You just basically clip the hands around the handles, and he also would have himself a shield as well. So let's go ahead and just remove all the things we just finished talking about. Just put those off to the side. Getting, though, a closer look at Warduke. I feel like, unlike the other figures we've already had a look at, this is the figure I may have actually had as a kid. Although, obviously, the fact that I don't have the other figure being brought in right now probably tells you the fact that between then and now, I've parted ways with the figure. Probably picked it up also at a garage sale, and if memory serves me correctly, it didn't have any accessories whatsoever. It was just literally a pretty cool looking figure that I saw inside of a cardboard box, and it was probably going for like 10 cents. I mean, 10 cents as a kid. If you happen to have like an allowance, I mean, I had very little of an allowance, but just enough that if you hit the local garage sales, you could probably just walk away with just a handful of figures. Bringing, though, in the original Warduke that we looked at from before. Again, obviously, the difference between the two is more the way they approach the paint. Kind of more really just a coat of paint of blue that gets added to his helmet, for example. The Ultimates version, for example, would have had now metallic blue, so there's definitely more of an upgrade between the two figures. If you're kind of more partial to what LJN did before with their original Dungeons & Dragons from the 80s, then you might maybe like the idea of getting an upgrade to him by getting the 50th anniversary release of him versus going with the more fully metallic, fully more realistic approach to Warduke instead. The body, from a color scheme standpoint, definitely seems like he's got a little more tan there on his body. The straps, as well as his necklace, are all approached kind of more of the metallic finishes, where, again, like with this one, sticks to the primaries of the blue, the yellow, and the red. Now he has also additionally down below here with his loincloth, what again would have been more of a darker brown with gold there on the front of this really cool looking belt buckle. He also now has this, but he has it more again in a very simple looking yellow. The yellow is in one area generally painted. In other areas, though, on the front of it, kind of looks like it probably could have used a secondary finish. Just a second coat could have gone really a long way, but it does look good. Really like the look of that quite a bit. Obviously, his chainmail is also something that was originally metallic blue on the first Warduke release. And again, now it just goes kind of more just the solid straight blue. But I like the color of the blue that they actually chose. I kind of want to go back and look at the original images of Warduke. Really, again, regretting that I never have the original figure that I could have brought in for comparisons. But even like looking back on the original LJN 83 release of Warduke, the color schemes are, again, pretty close. They're much closer with this version of him than they are closer than this version. Obviously, for the figure's articulation, it's going to be exactly the same as the original Warduke. So it's going to be on a ball joint. I know we haven't really spent a whole lot of time talking about the figure's actual features. Again, this one would be a case where, like, Warduke never removes his helmet, so you really never quite understand how grotesque and gruesome he looks like underneath. I love the glowing eyes on this figure. The original figure also would have had that as well. Some additional red there also on the top of his crown there. And I love, just again, like these fins on the sides of his body. I don't know why it kind of reminds me of Merman. But again, like for the figure's articulation, the head's going to be on a ball joint. It looks down a lot more than you would think it would. Head looks down about that far. It looks up. And again, that's the only more limitations on the figure's head sculpt is the fact that it only goes to about that high. The head also moves back and forth. The thing, unfortunately, about that, though, is because he does have the fins on either sides. I mean, you can feel right away that it's hitting shoulders, and you can't go any further than that. Of course, the necklace, though, is not a separate piece. It was probably a separate piece at one point, but they definitely have glued it in place, so you can't try to move the necklace around. The upper torso is going to be on a ball joint. It's a little bit more limited, obviously, because he's got, first of all, the shoulder here, and he's got then the straps here for his armor. The arms do come out at about 90 degrees, a little less than that. I did actually have to fight a little bit more to get the arms to go beyond 45 degrees, and even now, I feel like I'm fighting just a little bit more to get them past this point here. The arms do, by the way, rotate all the way around. A little bit more hung up, though, obviously, because he's got the strap there on the top. The figure does have a bicep swivel, a single hinge only in the elbow. The arms rotate back and forth this way as well. The hands also rotate with a hinge there as well. The lower body, by the way, not only does he have like a ball joint here, but he also seems to have the makings of a waist swivel, where you can get a little bit of movement happening in the waist as well. Legs split out, even though he does really have these, again, the little sheaths there on the side, little scabbards. This one isn't attached at all other than just the chain. This one here, on the other hand, is actually attached to the side of his loincloth. So when you are moving it, you kind of feel, especially when you bring the legs out, there's a little bit more resistance here. There's a swivel there on the top of the thigh, a single hinge only on the knee. The lower leg rotates. The boot itself also does rotate, and that may have more to do with just the way the figure was assembled. There is also an ankle pivot back and forth, and also as well, there's an ankle rocker on the 50th anniversary version of Warduke. Again, when it really comes down to picking out the figures, it's more of a matter of preference. If you're one that just really likes Dungeons & Dragons, you're probably going to be collecting both the Ultimate lines and as well the 50th anniversary LJN-inspired lines. But obviously if you're more kind of akin to the original ones that maybe you had collected in the 80s as a kid, I mean, there's something to be said also about the simplicity of all the 50th anniversary figures. Granted, we've only looked at 2 of the suggested 4 on the back of the packaging. We looked at now Strongheart and Warduke. Still have to look at Zarok. We still have to look at Elkhorn. Unlike those Zarok, we have already looked at Elkhorn. So when we do eventually get around to having a look at the 50th anniversary version of Elkhorn, like we had done here with Warduke, I'll have actually a chance, unlike the Strongheart from before, to bring in the original Ultimates figure so you can see the differences between the 2. I think any one of us looking at the Ultimate Dungeons & Dragons line that NECA has been producing so far wouldn't at all be wrong to make the assumption that sooner rather than later the action figure giant wouldn't be producing figures based on the 1983 LJN line with slightly simpler paint jobs. Now, obviously, you may not be collecting both lines. If you aren't as familiar, say, with Dungeons & Dragons or even what LJN was producing back in the 80s, you might just be more interested in sticking with the stuff that we got from the Ultimates. Any one of those figures from the Ultimate line definitely have a more upgrade in paint, even though they are essentially using the same bodies. If you, though, have sentimental value, or you have more, again, when you're looking at these figures, you like the idea that they look like the figures or, quote, toys I had when I was growing up, then you might more lean to the idea of collecting the 50th anniversary Dungeons & Dragons for that reason instead. If it wasn't the case I wasn't reviewing these, probably what I would have ended up doing, though, is having, honestly, the Ultimate figures, because, of course, they're coming in different type of packaging, would have the Ultimate figures loose on my shelf, which I have been doing up to this point, and I might be more interested in the idea of keeping the 50th anniversary figures sealed still inside of their packaging. Because they have cardboard packaging with a little blister card there on the front that you actually have to cut out. There's no other way, unfortunately, to remove these figures from their packaging prison. I would rather have just kept the figures sealed and put them on my wall that way. Which is one thing, again, I know based on the way they've done the packaging, they, again, were very heavily influenced by the kind of action figure packaging we would have gotten in the 80s, that once you open a figure out of the packaging is just considered discarded. You're going to throw it away in the garbage. Rather, though, I wish that the figure packaging was a little bit more collector friendly. So if there was a way at all, they could have made it so you could have actually removed the figure out from it without having to destroy the packaging. But again, like, if it's going to be based on the original 83 line, that's probably one of the biggest reasons why NECA made the packaging as it is. But I would definitely, if I wasn't reviewing these, like to have kept the Ultimate figures loose and on my shelf, because they are great looking figures, by the way, and in fact kept the 50th anniversaries still sealed in their packaging. What do you guys think of this line? Let me know down below in the comments section. If you are a big fan of Dungeons & Dragons, by the way, did you guys see yourselves collecting both the 50th anniversary line and the original Ultimates? Or would you more lean to one direction instead? Let me know what you guys think of these down below in the comments section. Big thank you once again to the folks over at NECA that did provide the sample of the brand new 50th anniversary Dungeons & Dragons Warduke that we had the chance to have a look at in this review. If you guys, in the meantime, did enjoy this video, I want to throw it a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and you'd like to stick around for more, if you haven't already, that is to say, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below and turn on the bell notification. We're going to also as well be looking at more NECA reviews, so making sure you're staying here on a regular basis. You can also go and do other things too. Eat, sleep, breathe, obviously would all be the more important things to function in life, but make sure you're coming back here on a regular basis, because we will definitely always have new NECA reviews on the channel. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.